a video on some beef ribs that I've bought in the supermarket, and I was kind of curious. So we're gonna have to play around with them. I don't think normally something like beef ribs are valued for money. These are £4 kilo, and I don't think there'll be. I think you could buy, even if you bought a joint of meat that was maybe £6 a kilo, you would probably get more meat for the money that you spent. There's going to be quite a lot of this that is bone. However, there's going to be lots of sinew and things, and the actual bone themselves. So we're gonna and there's some nice bits of fat as well. So what we don't get in meat for our money, we will certainly get in flavour from the bones and the sinew and all those type of things. So what we're going to do is we're going to we'll open it and we'll have a look first with my blunt knife. And we'll have a look at them. So obviously the beef ribs from somewhere near the ribeye, I would have thought. They're probably I don't think they're probably short ribs, to be honest, or maybe a little bit further along than the short ribs. I don't think that short ribs are particularly good value for money. I don't know why people bang on about them, but let's have a look. So half cut through them. So if we were to cut the meat off, there's not that much meat, but I think we'll be able to make a nice ragu type of sauce out of them. So whatever the weight of the meat is, 1.13 kilos of meat and bone, and then we've got about 300 grams of carrots and onions. I'd normally use celery, but I didn't want to buy a whole bulb celery, and I couldn't just buy a couple of stalks, so we're not going to use that. We've got some thyme in the garden, so we'll put that in, and then we've got a couple of tins of cheap chopped tomatoes that were about, actually they were on offer when I bought them. They're normally about 28p per tin, which is cheap, but they were reduced to, well no, they were on offer. I got some nectar points, so they're work out about 24p, something along those lines. So we'll brown these off. We'll get a bit of colour on them to get some flavour. I don't know how well they'll brown, because you can't really brown that bit. You're only really going to be able to brown that bit, and that bit. You can't really brown that, and that's probably no heat's going to get into that to brown it. So, but we'll give them brown, and then we're going to cook them in a pot, and we'll cook them on top of the stove. The basic general rule of thumb is if you cook on top of the stove, it takes half the amount of time than it does in the oven. So if you wanted to save money and speed up the process, the top of the stove works. Pressure cooker even quicker. I haven't got a pressure cooker. Maybe I should buy one someday. But I normally quite just like putting things on the back of the stove. And I think once you've sealed something in the pressure cooker, very difficult to kind of see what's going on in the pressure cooker. You're relying on recipes to tell you how long you should cook the meat, whereas I just kind of think I quite like to lift the lid off and have a poke around and see what's cooking. So we'll brown these off, we'll chop that up finely. I'm not going to bother peeling the carrots, so we'll chop those up, and then we'll, even though the tomatoes are chopped, we'll give them a puree so it's more like a liquid, and then we'll cook down for a long time until the meat's falling off the bone for as long as possible. We'll just kind of have to see. Might be 4 hours, might be 3 hours. We'll see how we go. So, beef ribs have been browned off. You can see we have colour, which is going to give us flavour. And then we've got 2 tins of tomatoes, which we're going to start off with. I'm not going to puree down the tomatoes. I think it's going to be cooking down for a long enough period that we won't need to worry about that. However, I am a little bit concerned that they stick onto the bottom of the pan. So if you just shake the pan like that, and then the juice from the tomatoes happens to be able to get underneath. And then we'll chop the vegetables and we'll give them a bit of colour so they can go on top. We just need that to get the bottom of the vegetables out. This was also the pan that I fried the beef ribs off in, so the vegetables have taken all the goodness and all the caramelised bits off the bottom of the pan as they've cooked. So, temperature on. Put a little bit of salt in to start off with, say that much. Lid on, which I should have probably had prepared. Lid on, and then we'll bring that up to boil, and then we'll turn it down to a really slow simmer. We want like a really slow simmer because it's nice and gentle, and it will be nice and tender. And then we'll kind of see how it goes. We might just end up with a little bit of a ragu sauce, which is kind of very full of flavour because of the meat and bones, with a little bit of meat in there. So we'll just kind of have to see. But yeah, interesting experiment, and probably more an authentic way of making a ragu sauce. But anyway, so there we go. That can come to the boil, back of the stove, and then slow cook until it's ready, which might be 2 hours, might be 3 hours, might be 4 hours, might be 5. The rib bones are cooked, and they've been on for a long time. They've certainly been on for 6 hours. And I've let them cool down a bit. So I suppose, thinking about it, the proper Italian way to eat this would be, you would be given that bone to kind of eat, and then with a bit of a sauce, and then they would use the tomatoes and the vegetables, and they would cook that down and serve it with the pasta. So you get like a 2-course meal for one type of thing. But as you can see, I suppose that there's more meat on them than I thought. But super tender. I mean, just falling off the bone. I mean, is there any? No, there's no point taking any of that. I can just go back in there. But it's just a case. I suppose what we'd do is we'd normally kind of flake the meat off, take all the meat off the bone from all the ribs, flake the meat up, and then add that back to the sauce. The pureed down carrots and tomatoes, and then serve that with pasta. Well, the Italians would probably do it slightly a little bit different. But as you can see, nice and tender meat. All this connective tissue is broken down. Give that to the dog. The dog will love you, or the cat. I'm not sure if cats love you in the same way, but dogs certainly would love you for all that broken down sinew and fat and goodness there. So there you go. Is it worth buying the rib bones and cooking it down that way? Not for the amount of meat that you get, no. If I'm honest, if you get the bones for free, yes, it's worth it. And if you're wanting to get as much flavour out of something as possible and get something really kind of quite rich and indulgent, that's certainly the way to do it, but not the cheapest way. If you're wanting to make like a meat ragu, the best thing to do would buy the cheapest boneless joint of meat, something like chuck, and cook it the same way that we did that, fry it off, and then slowly braise it down in carrots, onions, celery, and some tomatoes and some garlic and some herbs, and you will get the best kind of yield that way. This way you're certainly going to get more flavour because of the bones and for the sinews and from the fat. And some fat came off the top actually, which I scooped off. So there was quite a bit of fat that came out of it. I suppose there's a good 2, maybe 3 tablespoons worth of fat that came off. Fat's going to be delicious, and I'll use that for something else. But there you go. So just kind of experiment, just kind of see, and that's what you do with pork bones or lamb bones or pig bones, pig ribs, anything like that. Any spare bits of meat to make like a ragu. But there you go. That's what am I going to do with it? I'm going to shred the meat off it, and then I'm going to mix that back into the sauce, and I will use that for pasta dishes, I think. But there you go, kind of interesting. I'll put a cost to it, and we'll see how it kind of costs. Yeah, so I don't know, what's this video about? I don't know. Something just out of interest. So I'll just add. So I've kind of picked through the meat from one of the rib bones, and portion-wise, that's not a bad bit of meat. If you were to bulk that out with vegetables and serve the sauce with pasta, that would be kind of quite nice. That's the sinews that have kind of been left, and a few scraps of meat in there. So that's for the dog, and then you kind of go that much bone, that much sinewy stuff, and that much meat. That's not bad. That's not bad. But if you were on a more of a budget, unless you get something like that for next to nothing or free, as an offcut or something, the best bet would be to actually buy cheap cuts of meat, like a chuck, and braise it down just like we did with the ribs. But then you wouldn't have any bone or anything like that. You won't get the goodness, but I don't think that's just as important if you're on a tight budget. So, kind of out of my own interest, we will weigh how much meat I got from the bones. So that's all the waste. The bones are already in the bin. They've served their purpose. So, best way to do this, instead of messing up a plate, is to put a plate on the scale, set it to 0, and then you can weigh. So we'll get rid of the waste in the bin, because we haven't got a dog, sadly. So waste in the bin, and then we'll know what the weight of the meat is. So there is 368 grams worth of cooked meat from 1.134 kilograms of beef. So you know, you're best off buying a joint and doing it that way. However, this rich tomato, beef and vegetable sauce is absolutely delicious. I've tasted it. It's lovely and sweet. It's got loads of flavour to it. Very kind of complex. So I'm going to puree that. I'm going to put the meat back through it, and I'm going to use it for something else. So I reckon what? With a load of pasta, I reckon you get 6 portions. Yeah, like the Italian way of lots of pasta, a little amount of sauce. You'd get 6 really good portions, and people would be absolutely stuffed and think it was absolutely delicious. Yeah, there we go. I think that's it. Can't think there's anything more. Maybe there might be. There might be, but who knows? But anyway.